Hello, my wonderful viewers. Who wants to take a look at some fascinating alien species? Today, we will be looking at the winged, the friendly bat-like species that inhabits the world of humans are weird. So, some basic data. The winged are very small, about the size of your fist. They are very lightweight with hollow bones and large lungs to fuel their flight. Like most flying mammals, they have a super high nutrient requirement, which makes it fortunate that on their home world, they primarily eat the fruit-like structures that grow on bryophytes. These bryophytes are plants that live in the near endless forest that make up the winged's homeworld. Now, the winged in general, at least the ones that the humans will interact with who make it into space, are generally various bright red to dim earth tones. They have a series of sensory horns along their head. They are born without these sensory horns, with just their ears and their eyes closed and undeveloped. And as they age, their ears open, their eyes open, and their sensory horns begin to pop out. These sensory horns are very lightweight, sensitive structures built to give them the best sonic data on their environment, so that as they're flying through the never-ending forests of their homeworld, they are able to react to anything with lightning fast movements. Their eyesight is actually fairly good. They cannot make out extreme details at long distance. Their eyes are just not meant for that. But close up, they have extremely excellent macro vision, which helps them determine which of the fruit-like structures on the bryophytes of their homeworld are available for eating. Because of the hyper-abundant food sources on their homeworld, they never really developed much in the way of agriculture, and it was primarily curiosity that drove them through their various industrial revolutions, not so much necessity as it was for many other species. Their home planet has no axis tilt and therefore no true seasons. At the poles, it is colder at the poles than it is at the equator, but again, not by a tremendous amount. The cold at the poles is enough to make it reasonably uninhabitable, although to live there it does not require a tremendous amount of efforts on their parts. Primarily, the effect is seen in that the trees at the poles grow much slower and get much larger. Now, the trees on the wing's homeworld come in layers. You have the great trees of the deep going down deeper to places where they essentially get no sunlight. These trees rely on the thermal vents that comes through the very porous upper crust of the planet, and they draw their minerals and heat energy from the planet. They get the necessary. The plants on this world do photosynthesize. However, the topmost several layers of trees do photosynthesize. Now, on this first layer of trees, which are incredibly strong, reinforced with silicon, they are the base. The great trees, the deeps, are carbon-based life forms, but their bodies are reinforced with silicon, giving them structures many times larger than the largest Earth skyscraper. These trees maintain these structures by storing internal water reserves. There are great bulbous sections of the trees, so that even though they have to follow the same physical rules that Earth trees do, which limits their height to 300 or 400 feet, each tree, when it reaches a certain height, essentially creates an entire biome, collecting water from the other trees around it, and growing another tree, slightly smaller, but intertwined with the other trees around it for support. And so these trees of the great deep are essentially multiple trees, one growing on top of the other, constantly reaching up. Because the nutrients come from the top levels of the ecosystem, and the minerals and thermal energy come from the bottom, the trees are constantly passing these nutrient streams back and forth, allowing them massive heights. The greatest of the old trees have up to half a dozen of these essentially small oceans encased within them in a stacked vertically, with of course the top C's being the smallest and the lower C's on the top of the lowest great tree being the largest. On top of these great trees grow the mid-level trees. These are far more akin to our giant redwoods, the sequoias, or the eucalyptus trees in Australia. Averaging these trees, although instead of having 300 feet be their maximum, that's their average. Again, these trees grow, their root systems grow into the great trees, but they are entirely separate organisms, basing their structure on the very topmost of the great trees. These trees do have some primitive photosynthesis ability, but these are the ones that begin to be home to the bryophytes that the winged feed off of. It's in this mid-level of trees that the greater portion of the winged population lives. There are 3 or 4 stories on top of this, depending on how far from the equator you are. At the equator, there's really only a very scanty tundra-like biome on top of these mid-level trees that does a lot of photosynthesis, giant leaves that stretch basically like a thin shield over the mid-level trees. As you go further north and south, getting colder and colder, you get an increasing in number of levels on top of the mid-level trees, and you get increasing size, so that the forests at the poles are multiple times higher, not counting, of course, the great trees. The great trees are pretty much the same size whether you're at the poles or at the equator, but the mid-level trees on top of the great trees at the poles are larger, and every level on top of the mid-level trees. The winged generally do not tend to like being out in the open very much. While they have no deep-seated fear of open spaces, it just makes them mildly uncomfortable, and just the fact that they have to work really hard to get up that high, and the sheer height of these forests means that the topmost branches of the forest are extending into very thin air, which makes it hard for the winged to breathe and fly, because they actually prefer fairly standard oxygen density and air pressure when compared to the rest of the species. So they prefer about the same oxygen levels that humans do, meaning it was nearly their space age before they had fully explored the uppermost reaches of the upper levels of the polar forests. So they developed technology primarily out of curiosity. They were actually the first, because of their fantastic spatial reasoning, they were one of the first species to develop space flight, although their inherent psychological barriers to going out into wide open spaces prevented them from exploring much beyond their own planets and moons. They have a cluster of small moons that move the water and keep the waters basically sloshing around in their small tree seas, and does without making any particularly large tidal forces. The winged are extremely friendly. They primarily prefer to eat liquid diets, although they can manage certain solid foods. And for their mass, they need to eat a tremendous amount of calories. This primarily, as I said, comes from the bryophytes. Now, the bryophytes seem to put out these nutrient packets specifically as a defense mechanism against the winged and the other similar creatures in the environment. The purpose of this generosity seems to be that, one, the bryophytes, by tapping into both the networks of nutrients coming from below and above, have essentially an unlimited supply of energy, like many plants do, and providing these nubs on the outside seems to prevent the creatures from digging into their leaves and killing the plant. So these nubs seem to be almost entirely a defense mechanism, and the plants that can produce the most of these generally tend to survive the longest. And what little agriculture the wings have managed to do is, of course, selectively breeding for those plants that produce the most nutrient packets on their exterior levels. This has given the winged an incredibly sensitive sense of taste, and they greatly enjoy interacting with the culinary arts of the other species that they meet. So that is the history of the winged. Single star system. Endless forests going deep down into the surface of the planet, with roots stretching down into the hot magma beneath the crust, and going up miles and miles into the sky, one tree stacked on top of the other. So that's the natural history of the winged. If this sounds interesting to you and you want to know how these aliens interact with the strange humans, you can purchase the book Humans Are Weird, We Took a Vote. The name comes from a story wherein the winged do have to interact with a weird human. It will be available on Indiegogo, and after it's off of Indiegogo, it will be on demand, and then available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Books, and Kobo by Rakuten, available in paperback form, electronic form, and eventually audiobook form. So go check out the links below the video to find out what copy is available now, and peace out, my wonderful viewers.
The book from author Betty Adams, Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, is a humorous look at human behavior through the eyes of aliens. This book is arranged in separate reports or essays, documenting the experiences with humanity through the lens of the aliens who have to interact with them. This anthology of short stories and vignettes from alien points of view highlights some of humanity's quirks we can all relate to. Author Betty Adams captures how strange and interesting humans can really be. This is a fun collection of stories you will really get a kick out of. Humans Are Weird, I Have the Data, from author Betty Adams. Order your copy right now on Amazon.
Order page for Humans Are Weird, We Took a Vote is alive on Indiegogo. Go check out the link below the video to get your short story collection of human absurdity as seen through the eyes of our little green alien friends. Humans Are Weird, We Took a Vote, book 2 in the Human Absurdity series, available on Indiegogo. Check out the link below.